Hi everyone, today's video we're going to talk about dematting. Now we need to know when it's appropriate to demat. So when a dog comes into the parlour for the first time, we have a look at them. We can see today we've got Shaggy, Tibetan Terrier. He's a little bit scruffy. We need to assess the coat. Assess the coat while the customer's still in the grooming parlour with you, because they don't want any shocks in case you need to shave the dog off completely. Now there's going to be times when you can just get the knots out. There's going to be times when you need to take the coat off completely. So with Shaggy, we can see he's very short on the body, so he's not got any knots there. So I'm going to quickly just have a little feel around in his coat, and I can see and feel that there's knots in his legs, but they're not close to the skin because I can get a comb right behind them. I can feel in his abdomen, he's quite knotty, under here, and I can see in his legs that he's quite knotty, but it's more knotty than matted. So in this instance, I'd be quite happy to demat the dog and keep his coat nice and long. If his legs were solid and I couldn't even get the comb behind them, or in some of the areas, I'd take the coat off completely. And obviously you'd need to get the customer to sign a disclaimer in that instance. So what I'm going to do is, I'd advise owner, if they want to get knots out themselves, never to brush the coat dry. So if they are going to brush the dog at home, always use a detangling spray, so that when the coat's slightly damp, there's more elasticity into the coat. But I'm not going to bother doing that today because I'm going to put Shaggy in the bath now, and I'm going to do most of my dematting at the drying stage. It's the best time to do it, and I will tell you why in the next part, but I'm just going to put him in the bath. So now we've got Shaggy out of the bath, we're just going to blast him quickly. I'm blasting the back of him to about 95% dry because it's not very long, so I don't need to worry about get a straightening finish on the back. His legs and anywhere that there's long coat, I'm going to blast to about probably 80% dry because I want to work with my stand dryer using the brush and the stand dryer to demat. As I'm blasting, I'm using my blaster like a brush. I've got the flat head on it. I'm blasting from the root out because I want to try and push the knots a little bit further away from the skin. By doing this, it's going to be able to aid with my dematting, and it's going to ensure that it's less painful for the dog because I haven't got to try and get my brush as close to the skin as I'm working with the dematting. And the blaster's a great tool for getting knots further away from the skin. He's been bathed today in 2-in-1 shampoo, so it's got a little bit of a conditioning agent in there, which has obviously helped soften the coat, which is aiding in pushing it further away from the skin. So we've finished blasting Shaggy, so we've got the stand dryer out now. So I'm going to be using the stand dryer to isolate and be able to allow me to see where I need to demat, as well as obviously drying the coat. So I'm going to use some detangling spray, which is also going to help smooth and soften the filaments of the hair, which obviously helps the knots come out. So I'm going to be quite generous with my detangling spray. And then I'm going to be using a choice of 2 different brushes. So I've got the Simpsons Slicker here that's got the the flexi head, and it's got the firm side and the softer side. The firm side's definitely better for dematting because it will tease the hair out and the head flexes. I've also got the Christie's Amplifier brush. These are really great. They've got really nice long pins on them. The pin head's quite soft. As you can see, I'm using a padding action rather than a brushing action. The brushing action's not the correct motion when you're trying to get knots out. All that's going to do is pull on the dog's coat. The padding action's going to slightly tease the hair away, break down the knot. The knots start melting away with the padding action. It's like magic. It's a great invention of these brushes nowadays. Years ago we would have just took blades straight away to knots and lose the hair completely. You can see I'm working in an area here that's already completely dry, but I'm still not turning my dryer off. The dryer is a great tool to use alongside dematting because it isolates the hair. It gives you a clearer view of the part of the hair that you want to see. It allows you to get into the coat, and it just gives you a good view of where you're working. It's just a great tool, really. I can't big it up enough. So, yeah, that's a great way of dematting. It's definitely the best way. As I've said, working on slightly damp hair is better for dematting. Stops the coat from breaking. The hair has more elasticity. It's going to allow you to work it better. You're going to save more coat by doing it this way. So we're just working our way around the leg. I'm going to start using a comb. This is how I'm going to identify if there's still knots in there. You can see the comb there tugged. I'm not going to pull that any harder. That means there's still a knot in there. So I'm going to go back to my brush. By using the brush, I'm going to break it down, and then I'll get my comb back out again in a second to see. If the comb still tugs, which it did, I'm going to go back in again with my brush and break it down. Using the hairdryer, I can see quite well, but obviously there's still knots that hide away. So you still need your comb to identify if there's knots still in the coat. I'm going to lift him up. If your dog's dexterous enough, you can stand them up. The abdomen's a really, really sensitive area for dematting. So by using this action, you can see he's allowing me to do this. If this was painful to him, he would not allow it. But I'm being extremely gentle. It can look harsh at times, but I'm very, very aware of how hard and how much pressure I'm using with my brush. And by using the blaster initially and pushing the knots further away, it means that I'm just working on the knots rather than brushing it onto his skin, where the skin's thinner on the stomach and a lot more sensitive. That abdomen was really, really knotty, and it didn't take much. And you can see now my comb's going straight through. We're now working onto other legs. You can see here he's got some bigger knots in there, so I've now got my dematter out. This is a tool that's great, but it has got a blade on it, so be aware that you're making sure that you're always working with the blade facing away from the dog's skin. I'm using it just to tease it out. I'm using a slight twisting action. I'm holding onto the dog's skin, and I'm using the blades to break down the knot, and then I'm going back in with my brush and the same padding action again to break them down. So as I'm working my way around the legs, I'm going to go down into the feet. I'm going to go right down now in between the toes. That's an area that knots do tend to hide. So I'm using my comb to check, and I could see, yes, there was knots in between there. So going back in with my brush and my padding action, and I'm just going to work between my brush and my comb to keep checking to see if them knots are out. It's not the most comfortable area for the dog, but knots in there will get quite big and they can become quite painful for the dog. So ideally you want to get these knots out. Obviously you want to demat the dog completely, but you want to try and get them out without having to cut them out, which is another option that we could use. So them knots are out, so we're going to carry on working our way round, just checking in all the areas to see whether the coat's becoming knot free. You can see we're getting a nice finish on the coat at the same time. So we're also fluff drying whilst we're dematting. So we're doing this, we want to keep the coat, we want to be able to prep the dog correctly and ready so that we can save all of that coat and give the dog a nice finish. So again, going more into that abdomen, using my brush, going along to see and the comb to see whether the dog's completely knot free. Getting inside the legs, they're high friction areas. Inside the legs, in the toes, up in the armpits. These areas are where knots hide. So you really need to get into these areas whilst you're drying to ensure that you can get the knots out, because it's the most comfortable time for the dog to get the knots out. When you're trying to pull on a coat, all the dog's going to do is get frustrated with you. The last thing you want is for the grooming process to be a massively uncomfortable one for the dog. So you can see here, he doesn't like his front toes being done. He's mouthing a little bit. He knows there's a knot in between there, and it is a painful area. It's sensitive. That knot's not breaking down, so I'm going to go back to my dematting tool. Just let him know you're not going to cause them any pain. He's just mouthing at my toe a little bit here, but that's absolutely fine. He's moved away now and the knot's broken down. Got my comb completely knot free. So we're just going to go in, work our way up the inside of the legs. These areas are not always the easiest ones to get to, so you might need to manipulate the dog a little bit more. The more you get used to doing this, the easier it is going to be, and you're going to understand the areas that you've got to work in early on in your drying process. A lot of people tend to just sort of get the back dry, and it's the legs and the undercarriage that are going to carry the most amount of knots. So they're the areas you really need to work on. First of all, get them knot free, and then the rest of the drying process is going to be a lot easier for you. So we're going to start working our way up into the armpit areas. Have a little look around, because again, it's a high friction area in the armpit. going to have lots of knots up in there. You can clip the armpits out, but if you can save them by dematting and you can do it relatively pain-free, then do it. So we can see up in there is a few knots. It's not that bad. I'm not going to need to clip that out. I'm just going to need to lightly go through with my padding action, and I can break them knots down quite easily. He's not in any pain or discomfort, therefore I'm going to carry on with it. If I was causing him too much pain or discomfort, then I would stop the process. Again, don't be scared to use your detangling spray. A lot of the time we see this at college, that students, they'll spray once and that's it. This stuff is there. It should be used. Bear in mind, though, that obviously different coat types, it might leave a bit more of a greasy residue on. So if you are dematting a silk coat, for example, it will leave more of a residue. But the process is exactly the same for all of them. But because the silk coat by name is silk, it's silkier, so it's easier to demat anyway. But dematting process is exactly the same, be it on a wire coat, a wool coat, a silk coat. Shaggy's a Tibetan Terrier, so he's a double coat, classed as a DC2, which is more of the drop cut type of coat. So, but it's still the same process no matter what I'm doing. So you can see I've left Shaggy's head to the last. One of the reasons being you never fully get to blast a dog's head out. So by the time you come to dry the dog's head, it's going to be pretty much as dry as it would have been if you'd blasted it the same as you'd blasted the rest of the body. So that's one of the reasons I tend to dry the heads last. He's got a few knots round in his ears, so I've given him a nice spray over. I've got a nice hold on his muzzle. You can hold the beard, and I'm just going to work away again with that padding action on the ear just to break down the knots. That was quite knotty on that ear. It doesn't really come across that well in the video, but there was quite a big tangle in that ear. But you can see it's broken down nicely. I'm going to get my comb, and we can see that the comb's going through really quite silkily. Behind them ears as well tend to be another high friction area, or where dogs wear their collars. They're another area that tend to get quite tangled. So these are areas that you really have to focus on when you're doing dematting. But it's breaking down quite nicely, and it doesn't take long. You can see the brush is going through. You'll see as well with the action that I'm using, you need to be quite light. The more I'm trying to, if you do it too heavy, then all you're going to do is give yourself arm ache. The lighter you do it, you let the brush do the work. Using the tools that we've got available to us, i.e. the detangling spray, the brushes, the dryers, these are going to do the work. You're just manipulating these tools. So don't put too much extra effort in that you don't need to, because the tools are going to work better if you just use a nice light action on them. So now we've got the dog completely dry, we're just going to go through with a finer comb. I've swapped over to a comb here that's got finer teeth on it. So it's just going to pick up to see if there's any finer little knots left in the coat. I'm getting right down deep to the skin. I'm going to check in between them toes, up into the armpit. All them areas where we knew the knots were hiding as we dried the dog. But we're always going to double check before we're going to start any styling on the dog. So watch as I go through, watch how I comb. This is how you need to learn to comb. You need to get your comb right in there and understand the areas where knots are going to hide, and understand that if there is still knots, then I would turn my dryer back on at this stage. I'd put it on cold just to get them knots out, and I would spray more detangling spray even if the coat's dry. But thankfully we are knot free on this one. There we go. Shaggy is ready to be styled out. His coat's looking lovely. You can see the finer comb's going to drag slightly more. That's just because he's got a thick coat, and you will expect a fine comb to have a little bit of drag in a thick coat.